It's another Football Friday on News OK Live. I'm Mike Sherman, sports editor of the Oklahoman, here with at least a grand portion of our football coverage team. Joining us from his home in Norman, Oklahoma, OU beat writer Jason Kersey, and from downtown Oklahoma City, where she is getting ready for a meeting and not proctoring or monitoring somebody's recess activities, columnist Jenny Carlson. Both of you guys are covering the OU Louisiana Tech game. Our folks who are covering OSU and Florida State, the marquee game of the week in our state, certainly haven't joined us yet. But let's start with a crossover. I've got a bit of I got a crossover question for you guys. Florida State comes in with the returning Heisman Trophy winning quarterback in Jameis Winston. Florida State comes off going to the BCS championship game and winning it. Jenny, 5 years ago, this very week, the Oklahoma Sooners found themselves in a very similar situation, playing in Jerry's World in Arlington with the returning Heisman Trophy winner, Sam Bradford, ranked number 3 in the country, coming off the BCS championship game appearance. They lost to Florida. Florida State won. And then came a blitzing linebacker from BYU in to rain holy terror down on the Sooners, Sam Bradford's shoulder, and OU season. I'm painting a picture here. So you're saying it could happen. I've just painted a picture where I think the Cowboys can win. The quarterback must go down. What do you think?
Well, I think Jameis Winston not being available for Florida State would definitely be a game changer. It would, clearly change what Florida State was going to do offensively. And the Cowboy defense is clearly going to be getting its legs under it. I mean, even if this was a few more weeks down the road, if this defense, at least had a chance to be on the field together in a competitive game, you might think, well, maybe they can get a stop here and there. But this is the first time that a lot of these guys have been on the field in a major college game in a tough situation. So I think to ask them, to be really good, especially against a really good opponent, is going to be difficult. But no Jameis Winston on the field would definitely change the equation. But I think a lot of it's going to be up to that Cowboy offense to keep scoring points, keep scoring. To me, I thought Texas A&M and what they did on the road against South Carolina last night was a really good, maybe blueprint start. I'm not saying South Carolina is as good as Florida State, but get up early, keep scoring, keep putting points on the board. That A&M defense is still suspect in my mind, but yet they just scored enough points that the pressure was off. They could go on and make plays. I think Oklahoma State, if they do something similar, who knows? Maybe there's a ball game going into that fourth quarter.
Jason, you were not on the OU beat 5 years ago when BYU pulled that stunning upset. There's a lot of folks who thought that win would project BYU right in the middle of the BCS picture. It did not. I don't remember that much, frankly, about that BYU team. I do know the very nature of BYU is they have a lot of sometimes men playing against young men because lots of BYU players go on their Mormon mission and then return and play college football. But what do you remember about that game? And what clues are out there maybe for an upset recipe for the Cowboys?
Well, the thing I remember most, I was in the office. I was a page designer at that time at the Oklahoman, so I was in the office that night, and I remember it was a shocking moment when Bradford went down. But yeah, I mean, I think that was right at the end of the half, and even to that point, OU hadn't done much at all in that game. So BYU had done a good job. That was Landry Jones' first appearance when he came in the second half, and I think that was a tough situation to be thrown into when the Heisman Trophy winner goes down. And
Jason will unfreeze here in a second. Jenny, let's go back.
Something, Mike, I'll throw in real quick too. OU to that point had a bunch of these returning guys. They had Gresham. They had, I think G.K. McCoy was still there. I mean, all these guys coming back, a lot of guys that had said they weren't going to the NFL to come back and try to make a run at a championship. They'd already lost Gresham to injury. My brain's a little foggy in what else had happened at that point. But there have been some things leading up to that opener that weren't good for the Sooners, too. It wasn't like they'd gone through the preseason unscathed. Florida State, They've had a couple bumps in the road, but nothing quite so dramatic as we saw with the Sooners heading into that game. You could almost already tell that season was going to be a little bit bumpy for the Sooners because of the way that things had started out. But that was clearly, of all things that could happen, Sam Bradford going down. And Sam's never been the same. Let's be honest. That was the start of a really tough run that continues to this day. And, I don't think anybody expected it to happen at that point after that fantastic sophomore year that he'd had.
Football is a collision sport. That collision really did sort of change the arc of Sam Bradford's career. Not predicting anything of that but just saying that recipe really changed the Sooner season, changed that game. The Cowboys are not BYU, and Florida State is not those Sooners. However, Jenny, I can't remember, a time, I'm trying to think the last time a team just sort of waltzed through a regular season coming off as a defending champion. I know that Bama has had a great run here, but USC's great teams, there they were, a team for the century. They basically have to quarterback, somebody has to push Matt Leinart into the end zone at Notre Dame to avoid an upset there. And then the next season, here they come again. They're right on top in Texas. Vince Young and Mac Brown take them down in the Rose Bowl, and a Rose Bowl to remember. So the manifest destiny for Florida State, it looks like they're going to win every game. I saw something, some projection that based on the odds and things like that, this is projected to be their closest game of the regular season. And they are not projected to be very close. So people are talking to us about lots of feedback and information and data on how strong this Florida State team is. What can we nail down about this Oklahoma State team? What do you think the Cowboys can hang their hats on?
Well, I think you got to still look at the offense. Quarterbacks, J.W. Walsh is going to start, but they've got some other options at quarterback, so that'll be interesting. Could throw a couple wrenches out there against that Florida State defense. You've got a very deep wide receiver core. You've got running backs in Desmond Rowland and Tyreek Hill, who I really think can be a fairly potent combination. Rowland sort of being the power back, Tyreek Hill being the lightning back. I just think that it's going to be really interesting to see what the OSU offensive line can do in terms of giving J.W. Walsh time and creating enough space for those guys to run around a little bit. Obviously, that offensive line is a bit of a question mark, but they do have this to cause some problem. A ton of tests last year. But it wasn't like they rolled through every game. They did have some games where they were tested. So it's not to say they're foolproof. It's not to say that they're without blemish. I think they could be. I think they could be tested, and it'd be interesting to see what it was like if their backs were against the wall. I have to think the crowd is going to be largely orange, although I'm sure there'll be a lot of Florida State people there as well. But, it'll be interesting to see if they could get to the fourth quarter being close, what might happen with this game on Saturday night.
Jason, I looked at our picks. We have 7 people picking. Of course, we were 0 for 7 last night on the South Carolina-Texas A&M game. Russ?
Actually, I picked A&M to I didn't pick South Carolina to cover.
That's right. 4 of us, but I'm talking about winners here. We'll start there. Winners. Nice try. 4 of us picked South A&M to cover the spread, but winning, and none of us had the Cowboys. None of us had the Cowboys. I'm doing quick math here. Doesn't look like any of us had the Cowboys covering the spread, which is 17.5. But the Cowboys are starting your favorite OSU player, J.W. Walsh.
Yeah.
We haven't seen him behind center as the guy in quite a while. What is it about? Why do you love J.W. Walsh so much, and why might that love manifest itself from what J.W. shows out on the field against Florida State Saturday night?
Well, a couple of years ago when Wes Lunt was the starter at the beginning of the year and then got hurt, and J.W. Walsh came in, I just really like the way he plays. He's tough. I like watching quarterbacks that run around some. I think those guys are a lot more fun to watch. And yeah, I just sort of jumped on his bandwagon that year. So last year when he came in and played early, that was pretty pretty cool, but obviously Clint Shelf was the better quarterback last year. But I mean, I think he's the obvious guy to start the season, and people talk about Dax Garman and Mason Rudolph, and maybe they'll come on at the end of the year. But at this point, when you're playing the defending national champion, I think you got to go with the guy with the most experience, and it sounds like that's what they're going to do. So if he has a good game, I guess anything could happen. I picked Florida State to win pretty handily because I just think they're an excellent team, and I don't think Oklahoma State is experienced or quite talented enough to hang with them, at least at this point.
Okay.
Bringing up the quarterback conversation, I think Jason brings up a good point. With the skill set that J.W. Walsh brings, he's not as accurate a passer as maybe those other two are. Now, we haven't seen them in a major college game, so I guess that remains to be seen. But with a retooled offensive line, you got to think his scramble ability could come in handy. Having a guy out there that can move around a little bit if that pocket collapses or if time is short, I think that could be really important in this game. Maybe under other circumstances, those other guys might be more successful, but this is an offensive line that's untested, so the ability to get out and make something out of nothing or get out of trouble, I think that could really come in handy with J.W. Walsh on Saturday. We'll see. And maybe he's an improved passer, too. Last year we saw him in the offseason work on his accuracy. I think it improved somewhat. If he spent the offseason, again, working on accuracy, we can maybe see that start to come out. And if he can just keep that defense a little more honest than we saw him when he lost the starting job against West Virginia and then against TCU, if he can be a little bit more accurate, I think that could really cause some defensive problems, maybe not Florida State, but in other games. We'll see how that all comes together as the season goes on.
Guys, one last point about the OSU-Florida State game specifically, and this is a bit of a crossover too, because one of the big factors in how Oklahoma stunned Alabama came in the speed and tempo with which OU played. Of course, after that game, the big upset, the thing that's really propelled OU back into the title contention, there was all this talk about needing to slow down the speed of play. There was all this talk about a minimum play clock. Nick Saban came off. It all came off as sour grapes. But we saw a lot of the big guys for Alabama sort of gassing. The Sooners really came at them fast. Is there a chance that Oklahoma State could do the same thing? Mike Gersich, hired from a small college in Pennsylvania because his offense produced and it played fast. Could OSU pull the same trick on Florida State with similar effect? Jason.
Possibly, although I think Florida State is a little bit better equipped to maybe handle. They've got some more experience with. I mean, you look at they were able to beat Auburn last year, and I don't know that anybody plays faster and with more tempo and speed than Auburn, and they beat them in the national championship game. And Nick Marshall and that Gus Malzahn offense, I think, is probably quite a bit tougher than this Oklahoma State offense. So. I mean, I guess if they really get going and are able to play fast, they could catch them off guard. But I think Florida State would be ready for that.
Hey, Jenny, I got Steve here on the News OK Live page asking a question. I'll let you address it. What do you feel is the best position group matchup that favors the Cowboys?
That's a really good question. I'm intrigued about the matchup of Oklahoma State's defensive line against Florida State's offensive line. Florida State, all seniors, all returners on that offensive line. I think that's going to be a real strength-on-strength position for them. But I have to think that what the Cowboys have out of the backfield, runners-wise, and I think you have to group in J.W. Walsh and his feet in that equation. I think what they bring out of the backfield could be a spot where they get an advantage because they have that, again, as I mentioned before, that good yin-yang thing going on with Rowland and Hill, and then J.W. Walsh being able to get out and cause some havoc with his feet. I think that could be an area where you might see him have a slight advantage. I can't remember exactly how good the Florida secondary is in terms of cornerbacks, but, I mean, obviously the wide receiver group for OSU is really talented, but, I assume that those cornerbacks from Florida State will be equally talented, so that could be a wash matchup there. But I could definitely see Oklahoma State's backfield and what they do with their feet being an area where they can maybe gain a little foothold out there.
a segue to the Sooners and Louisiana Tech, 6 o'clock Saturday night in Norman, is this question. What's more likely, Jason, that the Cowboys of Oklahoma State are underrated or the Sooners are overrated?
That's a good question, too. I would say I think it's probably more likely that the Sooners are overrated, and the reason I say that is because of the just stunning lack of offensive production they return. And I'm writing about that for tomorrow's Oklahoma. And going back through the Stoops era, you have to go back to his very first year on the job to find a team that returns this little in terms of offensive production. The two leading rushers back this year are Trevor Knight and Blake Bell. And Blake Bell's not going to be running the ball that much, I don't think. Leading receivers, you have Sterling Shepard, who's shown what he can do, but Deron Neal only racked up about 170 receiving yards last year, and he's the second leading returning receiver. Blake Bell is the leading returning passer, obviously, because of all the games he played. So, and really, if you take Knight and Bell out, it looks really bad in terms of the returning production. So, I think there's a much better chance we and the whole country has very much overrated OU than underrated OSU, I guess.
Jenny, who you got? OSU underrated, OU overrated?
Yeah, I'm gonna go with Jason on this one too. I do think I think it is a little bit more likely that OU may be overrated. Now, I think their defense is where you are building all the rankings and all the hype. For all of the love that Trevor Knight has gotten after the Sugar Bowl performance, it's really the defense that is the pillar of this team and the pillar of the hopes that Oklahoma has. Clearly some areas where there's a little bit of trepidation. You've got a very thin linebacker position that Jordan Evans is going to hold down, but then his backup is a walk-on. So, clearly there's some depth issues there. You're breaking in a secondary that doesn't have Aaron Colvin, but they've got talent there. So I think, and obviously the defensive line is I really think where that strength is. You've got great depth across that defensive line. Talented starters, but then really good backups. So to me, that's where this Sooner team is its best, is on defense. And then it's going to be, how good can those receivers be with guys like KJ Jones? KJ Jones, right?
Young, KJ Young, right?
Young. Who's KJ Jones? I don't know. I almost said KJ Johnson. Maybe.
Some PGA golfer, I don't know.
But, some guys that we really haven't seen much out of, how good can they be? And maybe the answer is pretty good, And then Jason mentions those skill positions, the running backs, guys that you think could be pretty good, a guy like Keith Ford, a guy like Alex Ross. But how good are they actually going to be? That remains to be seen. If they can be as good as their, high school rankings and all that sort of thing would lead us to believe, I think the offense will be in good shape, but clearly it's about the defense with this team because it does look like the talent and the depth is there on that defense.
Jason, what's going to happen Saturday that'll give us any true indication of how good this team is? The Sooners are 38.5-point favorites. They're playing at home. What will we be able to take away from this game to shed some light on OU's fitness as a title challenger?
Well, I think watching the skill position guys and the way that they sort of handle their first real test in front of the big crowd, I think Trevor Knight will be an interesting player to watch, obviously, because last year his first game was against Louisiana Monroe, not a very exceptional team, and he looked really bad. And I think everybody wants to know if he can carry over the Sugar Bowl. And, obviously he's going to have to play a much better team to sort of fully prove that. But if he comes out and isn't accurate and, looks a little rattled, doesn't seem to have good chemistry with his new players, his new skill position players, I think that's a big concern. And then I think the linebackers are going to get a really good test with Kenneth Dixon, the Louisiana Tech running back. He's a tough runner who set the NCAA freshman record for rushing yards a couple of years ago, and he's really physical. So I think Jordan Evans and some of those guys are going to get a good test. And then I also would look at the safety, the new safety, Ahmad Thomas, who's going to start to replace Gabe Lynn, and Julian Wilson at cornerback. If they now, one thing about that though is that Louisiana Tech has suspended a couple of their top receivers, but still, Julian Wilson out there on an island, he hasn't been there in that spot since high school. So that'll be interesting to watch him and see how he adjusts.
Jenny, Jason referred to Trevor Knight. Of course, all eyes are on the quarterback at OU. But I wonder, we did see him have some jitters. We did see him play erratically at stages last year. Then he got hurt. But we've seen him and heard him and just sort of seen how sort of confident and polished he looks this year. We've also seen this incredible performance about Alabama. Don't you think that he's answered any questions about is he ready for this moment? Do you see a chance that he would regress after such a great moment, such a great performance like he had against Alabama, and such an offseason in which everything he did sort of communicated he's the leader of this team and ready for the job?
Well, off the field in settings we see him, he clearly looks like a guy that is made for that position. Jason wrote earlier this week as well about, how things have changed in terms of practice now that Trevor Knight is clearly the starter and that Blake Bell isn't the backup because of the skill set difference between Bell and Knight. When both of those guys were in the mix last year, the plays that worked best for one weren't necessarily the plays that worked best for the other, and it really kind of cut back on practice time and guys that were getting really efficient in the plays that Trevor was most adept at. So I think that the offense is further along. He's further along. Clearly, that means that he's a better player now than he was even in that Sugar Bowl. I think the biggest question with him, and even a question, even though I doted all over the defense a little bit ago, I still think a question with them is consistency. That's the biggest thing in my mind with Trevor Knight. How well is he going to play week in and week out? How well is the defense going to play week in and week out? I'll reflect on the defense for a second. It was late in the year that defense went to K-State and let Tyler Lockett run absolutely crazy all over him in the first half. It took Aaron Colvin coming off his sick bed with one arm and one shoulder working to shut Lockett down and turn that game around. There's no Aaron Colvin on this roster anymore, folks, and that defense is going to have to make up for some losses, and they're going to have to play well week in and week out. Where is that consistency there? To me, that's a question with the defense, but that's the big question with Trevor Knight as well. He's got to stay healthy, and he's got to be consistent, and we don't have enough of a body of work to know if he's going to do that. I mean, I think that he's got all of the earmarks to do all of that. I don't have any doubt that he can. Now it's a matter of will he, and he's just got to come out and prove it week in and week out that he's going to be good for this team every time he steps on the field.
Jenny, on our way out, Jason's already plugged his story for pregame in Saturday's editions of the Oklahoman to be available on News OK. Thereafter, tell us what you're writing to set up the Sooners versus La Tech.
That was a good teaser by Jason. He kind of slipped that in there just like a pro. So I'm not coming at it from that perspective. But, yeah, a significant day tomorrow. Bob Stoops will be coaching his 200th game at Oklahoma, and that puts him in a very small group of coaches that have done that and are doing that right now. Only 3 coaches have coached more games at one school, that being Frank Beamer at Virginia Tech, Larry Blakeney at Troy, and Bill Snyder at Kansas State. So Bob Stoops in a very small group. Coaches don't usually stay at one school this long, and I'll be looking at some of the ramifications of that. Also, and sort of focusing, I guess, on probably an underappreciated aspect of that, which is family staying in one spot. He has he and his wife Carol have had a chance to raise their kids essentially in one place, which in the coaching profession doesn't happen very often. So something that I think Oklahoma fans appreciate Bob for the job he's done on the field, but there's sort of that underappreciated aspect of things off the field that their family's gotten to be in one spot all this time.
And with that, we'll end this edition of Football Fridays on News OK Live, but you can stay with the best coverage team every day at News OK and every morning in the Oklahoman. Thanks, guys.